All aboard! Welcome to another episode of the All Aboard podcast. I am your host, Brandon DeFreitas. Happy to have you guys back here. Today we're going to be continuing our AFC East walkthrough, and we're going to be touching on the Buffalo Bills and the New York Jets. Quick administrative item, just to make the sound a little better, I turned off my air conditioner here. Unfortunately, in the Northeast, it's about 98 degrees today. So we'll see how this goes. You might get a little sound difference midway through the show. Either that or you'll start seeing sweat beads going down my head. So one way or another, you'll know what my decision was and whether I got a little too hot up in here. But like I said, we're going to continue our series here. We're going through each division. We touched on the New England Patriots on the last episode 1. Here on episode 2, we're going to do the Buffalo Bills and the New York Jets. And then in episode 3, we'll touch on the Miami Dolphins and some miscellaneous wrap-up items from the division. As you can probably tell by the timing, I think we're doing this around once a week or bi-weekly. It's going to take a little bit of time to get through the whole NFL. So we're going to get into the regular season, I'm sure, at some point. I still think this is valuable because, what we're trying to do here from a dynasty perspective is go through all the teams, look at their contracts, and then find some observations that dynasty owners can use to make moves ahead and beat their league mates, trying to figure out who's going to take over roles in future years. So it actually could get pretty interesting as we get into the regular season because we're also going to know how some of these guys are performing. Right now, we're looking at contracts, how they performed last year. So I think it's going to add a little bit more context. So we'll have a slow go through the whole league. And during the season, maybe we can touch on a couple observations too. But I still think this is going to be an enjoyable and useful format for everyone out there to look at the contracts and start planning ahead to 2023 in a dynasty league. And with that, we'll stop no further, and we'll start with the Buffalo Bills. Top team in the division last year, definitely starting to look a lot like the Patriots did for a decade in the AFC East. And the reason is quarterback Josh Allen. What a stud. Definitely one of the top 5 quarterbacks, probably even higher in the league right now. And, not a whole lot we can talk about on the contract front because he just signed going into last year a new extension. So he's signed through 2028. And just for a little bit of fun, his dead cap this year would be $93 million. So even if he stunk it up, it wouldn't matter because he's been so good, but there's no way the team could move on from him anytime soon. So, this is not breaking any news, but Josh Allen's going to be a long-term starter for the Buffalo Bills. We all knew that. I think looking at the backup position, if you're in a really deep super flex league, it's Case Keenum and it's Matt Barkley. And Case Keenum's on a 1-year deal, $3.5 million, no guaranteed money. Matt Barkley, only $920,000 cap hit with only $125,000 dead cap. So there's really not a clear backup, I would say, on this team. It's probably Case Keenum, but to be honest, even in I have a fairly deep super flex format I play in for Dynasty, and Keenum and Barkley are not on the radar. I mean, if you're looking and you're trying to make a waiver wire list for when Josh Allen gets injured, it's probably Case Keenum, but nothing much else to see here. We'll move on to the running back position. And the running back position, there's a lot more going on because you have starter Devin Singletary. They drafted James Cook in the second round at the 31st pick of the second round this year. And then they also had Zach Moss there as an incumbent. So they have a pretty, I was going to say a pretty deep running back core, but, Singletary and Moss so far in their careers have been, I would say slightly above average and probably even lower for Zach Moss. So hasn't been that great, but you add James Cook into the equation, and for fantasy football purposes, it's definitely a little bit muddled. Let me get this cord out of my way. Sorry, guys. So it's a little muddled there in Buffalo at the running back position. But let's take a look at the contracts and try to figure things out and get ahead of the game here. Devin Singletary, it's his last year of his rookie deal this year, age 25 season. He had one of those base salary jumps due to performance up to $2.5 million. And what this is we saw this with the Giants and Darius Slayton too. Anytime you're on your rookie contract, if you hit certain performance metrics, your final year your deal goes up. And the purpose of this is, these guys come in and they play 4 years under a rookie contract, and if they have a high level of performance, like how long is your NFL career? Like we could look up the average NFL career, but 4 years is a long time, and you're not hitting a payday at that point. So for some of these players, if they start to outperform their contract, the NFL has escalators, or the contracts have escalators that'll bump them up. And for Devin Singletary, the final year of his deal, he's been bumped up to $2.5 million, which is still like a really decent deal for the Buffalo Bills for a starting running back. Unfortunately, and we're not talking about the Giants, but in Darius Slayton's case, getting bumped up might result in him being cut. So I mean, a little bit of positives, a little bit of negatives. And as you can see here, there's only $250,000 dead cap. So not a whole lot of that bump up is guaranteed. And I think that's a little bit of an issue for the players in terms of like how they structure it, but that's a whole different story. So Devin Singletary, it's only $2.5 million, $250 million dead cap. All this together, it's doubtful the Bills move on prior to week 1. But that said, they don't really. It's only, like I said, it's only a year left, and if the Bills see Zach Moss and James Cook performing really well in the preseason, I guess it's possible. But again, for a Super Bowl contending team, they'd probably prefer the depth. So I think you're safe here with Devin Singletary. James Cook, he's on a 4-year rookie deal. Again, he was the 31st pick in the second round. He's definitely a pass-catching back. He's a little bit on the smaller side. But so are Singletary and Moss, to be honest, as well. So these are all smaller backs. And, James Cook, he's settled here for the next, several years just based on being selected in the second round off draft capital. So of all of these guys, he's definitely the one that in 2023 you can just pencil in for being part of the Buffalo offense. And we saw this offseason, they made a heavy run at J.D. McKissic as a pass down back, and that's really what James Cook is. So they're trying to find that role in their offense. And, I would expect, all those things together, you're pretty confident James Cook is going to have a decent role in the offense this year. And probably from a fantasy perspective with the receiving work he's getting, a spot flex role with the upside of more if Singletary and Moss get hurt. Moving on to Zach Moss, I think to tie this together a little bit, Singletary, last year was rookie deal. James Cook comes in on a 4-year rookie deal, and they drafted Zach Moss in 2020. They're doing a little bit of what the New England Patriots do, where they're recycling backs through the draft, and it's hard to see them re-signing Devin Singletary. I can't see that happen. He hasn't performed up to snuff so far in his career to deserve a second contract, and they already drafted James Cook to replace him. And I'm sure the team is hoping Zach Moss, has a little bit of a rebound season and can come into the Devin Singletary role and work with James Cook moving forward. So based on that New England Patriots model of how they're drafting running backs, Zach Moss has played 2 seasons. He has 2 seasons left. He's going to have a little bit of a chance to compete for a game day role in 2022. The problem is he's not great on special teams. So if you're a third running back, typically you got to be good at special teams to make the game day roster. So I think from a dynasty fantasy perspective, what you're looking at here is, okay, Devin Singletary, I'm counting them out for 2023 for the most part for the Bills. So you have James Cook, and as much as I like James Cook's receiving role, I can't ever see him being the featured running back there, like the full featured running back with no help. So there's a chance that Zach Moss is that guy who's performing alongside James Cook in the future. So if he's there on your dynasty waiver wire, I don't think you're going to get much out of him this season. But if you pick up Zach Moss and he looks pretty decent, there's a chance he's the guy working with James Cook next year, which has a little bit of depth value in a dynasty format. So depending on how deep your league is, I'd keep an eye on Zach Moss as a potential add and purely as a stash for 2023. I don't think you're going to get much out of 2022. So definitely be aware of how deep your league is before you make a move like that. There was some reporting. They asked Brandon Beane, the GM of the Bills, about Zach Moss, and he said he's looking forward to a bounce back season. And you could just say, hey, that's GM talk. Of course, he's going to say something good. That said, though, he did have a hip injury going into training camp last year. And the word out of Buffalo is that he couldn't cut to one side. And that might have severely impacted his performance. So, again, with that and the fact that Singletary's gone next year, I would tag Moss as a potential add in a deep dynasty format. A couple other running backs on the roster. They brought in Duke Johnson. But I would say they brought in Duke Johnson early in the offseason before with the whole J.D. McKissick situation. Once that was blown up, they signed Duke Johnson, but then they also drafted James Cook. So based on his deal, 1 year, $1 million, only $380,000 dead cap, he's going to have to really perform in training camp to stick on this roster. And I sort of would tag him as a cut and ignore in a dynasty format. Taiwan Jones, you can safely ignore in a dynasty format. But this is a player who could be the third running back on game day roster because he's a special teams ace. And this is where it comes to Zach Moss, like potentially being inactive through the season in 2022, is if the Bills go into a game and they have a third running back, they really want him to play special teams. And Taiwan Jones can do that. That's what he's on the roster for. I know the coaching staff loves him, so I expect him to make the roster. But that's more of a note in terms of Zach Moss's role for this year, is that he might be inactive on game days because of Taiwan Jones. But while we're on Taiwan Jones, I do have a funny story to tell everyone, and it's pretty sickening that I remember this. He's 34 years old now. He's been in the league a long time. And I actually remember starting him as a rookie in 2011. And I must have been off my rocker. I don't know what I was thinking, but I traded for Darren McFadden that year, who was on the Raiders, and McFadden got hurt. And I was like, oh, this rookie Taiwan Jones, he's fast. And opportunity matters for fantasy football. I'm also in college, and a lot of the analytics and the industry didn't exist the way it does today in 2011. So I took it upon myself to start him. And spoiler alert, it did not work out. I had a horrible game from him. He's never really been a running back in the league. I think he played defensive back a couple seasons ago. So he's a special teams player. College Brandon did not know that. Probably lost that matchup, but thought that'd be a funny tidbit. And pretty crazy to think the 2011's a decent amount of a long time ago. And he's still in the league. So can definitely make money as a special teamer. We'll touch on the receiver room now. I think there's definitely some things to dig into at the receiver position for the Buffalo Bills. Obviously, Stephon Diggs is the leader in that room. He's entering his age 29 season. He just signed a brand new 4-year, $96 million contract, $21 million bonus, $70 million guaranteed. So that's the vast majority of the contract guaranteed, 70 over 96. It's 4 years. And looking at the details of the contract, 2025 is really the first real out for Buffalo. Entering what would be his age 32 season, that would be $18 million of dead cap, and there's $68 million left on the contract. So it's really front loaded in terms of guaranteed money. But looking at that, you get 2022, 3, and 4, I think, realistically as a dynasty owner. So you're looking at him, I would say, tied to Josh Allen for at least those 3 years. If he's still performing, maybe they rework his contract at that time. But if I'm planning as a dynasty owner, I'm saying there's a lot of guaranteed money here. They're definitely counting on him to being tied to Josh Allen for 3 years and in a starting role. So that's going to have value even if he does experience a little bit of a decline. I'm expecting age 29, 30, and 31. He'll probably still be close to the elite level that he's been at and then have a drop-off after that. Even if after 2 seasons, Stephon Diggs is, starting to decline, a starting receiver tied to an elite quarterback like Josh Allen is going to have value in a fantasy football format. And I know some of my league mates, are probably watching this like, Brandon just traded for Stephon Diggs. Of course he's saying that. But I think you do have to follow the money. Like, yeah, 29 starting to get up there a little bit, but the Bills are telling you with $70 million guaranteed that they think he has a few seasons left at the top of his power. So I think I'm going to follow the money there, follow the Buffalo Bills, and kind of frustrate my league mates talking up one of my players on the podcast. After Stephon Diggs, it's definitely like the next guy everyone's looking at in fantasy is Gabriel Davis. He was a 2020 rookie, so he's halfway through his rookie deal, 2 seasons left. What I thought was really interesting going through the team, and this isn't contract related, but you look at the receivers, the outside guys are Stephon Diggs and Gabriel Davis. Everyone else is primarily a slot receiver. And we'll list it off here. Isaiah McKenzie, Jamison Crowder, Khalil Shakir. Those guys are all primarily slots. Even Marquez Stevenson and Tavon Austin. And so, like, the only other guy who has, like, an outside frame on the team is Jake Kumaro. And he's more of, again, like Tywan Jones, a special teams guy. He's not really a receiver. So, well, I mean, that's a little insulting, but he's not really primarily a pass catcher in the offense. He's there for his special teams role. And what I think is interesting about this is there's a lot of debate on Gabriel Davis out there in the industry. And it's just so hard for me to look at it. I'm like, we can debate his talent all day, and maybe he's not as talented as some people like to make it seem. That said, though, he's pretty much guaranteed the number 2 role and an outside role in that offense. No one else on the roster can even play the position. It's Diggs and Davis and Kumaro. So it's like, any way you slice it, even if he's disappointing, he's going to have volume, and volume is the most important thing in fantasy football. So I think there's a safer floor there with Gabriel Davis than people want to believe. And there's upside if he does have the talent that people, some people in the industry have been saying he has. So I'm in on Gabriel Davis for that reason, because you can be a naysayer and you can totally question the talent, but you can't question the role. And like I said, he's going to be in that top 2 role all season. And that's just the way the Bills pass the ball. There's going to be a lot of value there. So really a prove it deal for Gabriel Davis. I would say a buy for Dynasty, but I can't. It depends on your league, depends what they think. And believe me, the Gabriel Davis owner in your league is really high on him after that playoff game. So I don't think you can buy him, but more from a redraft perspective, just a little vote of confidence for him based on the other receivers in this room. So now we can go through those slot options, because everyone else on the team is a slot option. Isaiah McKenzie, he torched the Patriots slot cornerbacks in those last 2 games of the year, and he's on a fresh 2-year, $4.5 million deal. $1.2 million is guaranteed. Not a whole lot of guaranteed money, and I think what this tells you is, for anyone hot on Isaiah McKenzie, it's possible he does something and he continues it, but I don't think the Bills came hard to the table. They didn't put a lot of chips on that. So I'm not betting hard on any of the Bills slot options after going through this. And there's your reason right there for McKenzie. Really low guaranteed money. Jamison Crowder, 1 year, $2 million deal, $1.8 million guaranteed. Again, it's a $2 million deal in this receiver market. And maybe it was signed before Christian Kirk. I'd have to take a look at that. But again, he has slightly more guarantees than Isaiah McKenzie. But, based on this, I think both players are virtually guaranteed to make the roster. But I think it's a real competition between the two. And I also think both of them, the Bills didn't really put a lot of chips on. So for fantasy football, I'm out on both. On Dynasty, I would be out on both as well. And we're going to touch on the tight end position a little bit here. I think, to me, this is signaling only 2 outside receivers, couple of slots. They bring in O.J. Howard. I bet we're going to see a little bit more of the 2 tight end set here and 12 personnel coming in for the Bills this year. So I don't think I'm in on any of these slot options. Khalil Shakir, rookie from Boise State. He was drafted 5th pick of the 5th round. A guy Matt Harmon from Reception Perception thought was a real surprise for him. He did a little article on partial sample sizes. And for anyone, a little plug for Matt Harmon, Reception Perception. He charts a lot of the routes and success rates for these receivers coming out of college and in the NFL. And he really looks to identify success and win rates without looking at the effect of the quarterback position. I think it's well worth the subscription. He's a great guy to look at. I really trust his opinions with wide receivers, and totally recommend him as a follow and a subscribe. But Khalil Shakir is a guy he likes, and he's a slot archetype, kind of like a big slot type, 6 feet, 196. What I think is interesting is when we talk about the outside receivers, that has a little bit of size to play outside too. So I wouldn't completely rule out Khalil Shakir beating out Jake Kumaro as the outside backup. It remains to be seen whether or not he can succeed in that role, but I think he's interesting in the Dynasty format because you can probably get him. I know he went in the 3rd round of our draft. He could be free off your waiver wire after if you can just stash him, because there's not a whole lot of receivers here going forward. It's going to be Diggs, Davis, and who else knows is going to be on the team. Like McKenzie will be there, but more special team slot. I think Shakir's interesting going into 2023. And even for this year, if Gabe Davis or Diggs went down, I think there's a chance he's the outside guy and not Jake Kumaro. We talked about Kumaro. We don't have to talk about much more. He's a special teamer, outside backup option, so you can rule him out. Stevenson and Tavon Austin. Stevenson was a rookie last year. Some reports in The Athletic, he's having some fumbling issues with the coaching staff. I sort of expect he's going to get cut. And then Tavon Austin, 1 year, $900,000 contract, opportunity to win a role in camp, but so many slot options, it's tough to see Tavon Austin really getting something. So, again, to summarize the receiver position, I think the contract's telling you Diggs has around 3 years left, or at least the Bills are betting that he does. And then really looking at the outside receivers and saying, well, if you're one of the people who thinks Gabe Davis has this massive downside in fantasy, well, I'd like to hear who the guy is who's going to come in and take his role on the outside, because I don't think there is one currently on the roster. Tight end position, I sort of hinted on this. I'm a little interested at the tight ends this year, and I know Dawson Knox was tight end or touchdown dependent last year in fantasy football, but they made a point to bring in O.J. Howard, and they have Dawson Knox and O.J. Howard. And I sort of look at, when you look at those receivers, having a little 12 personnel in there, 2 tight end sets, couple of receivers, I think that could be what you really see on the field this year, and maybe more tight ends and less of the slot players. Because, again, not a whole lot of money in those slots. I don't think Jamison Crowder's really that good anymore. And I don't think Isaiah McKenzie is more than really, a special teamer, type role player. And I think Dawson Knox could potentially be in a breakout season at tight end. He's entering his age 26 season. It's the last year of his rookie deal. So we're going to find something out this year. He's not exactly a hot commodity in dynasty leagues right now. I think most people in the redraft format expect that he's a little overvalued because of his touchdowns last year. So in a dynasty, I think you can still buy him. And if there's a tight end this year who's going to make that Mark Andrews jump into the elite category, I think it's Dawson Knox, because number one, what do you look for? Elite quarterback. And if they sign him, that's the biggest thing. He's only on for 1 year left. But if they sign him, he'll be tied to Josh Allen going forward. He's really athletic. And look at the opportunities in the offense. It's Stephon Diggs. And maybe if you're questioning Gabriel Davis, is Dawson Knox, guys? So the way they pass the ball, they can support 3 pass catchers. I'd put my money on Diggs, Gabriel Davis, and Dawson Knox. I think he's going to be a little bit more involved in between the 20s this year. He's an extension candidate. I would not be surprised if he gets extended before the end of the year, especially with his talent. And, you look at O.J. Howard, I said some 12 personnel, but there are reports out of minicamp that O.J. Howard did not look explosive. He had that Achilles injury 2 years ago, and he really hasn't been the same player. And then you look at his deal, 1 year, $3.5 million deal, about $3.2 million of it guaranteed. So he's going to be on the roster for sure, but I think it's more as a blocker. You look at the tight end market, Evan Ingram got $9 million guaranteed, and Njoku got a big contract. Gerald Everett got a bigger contract. So yeah, you look at 3.2 guaranteed and it might tell you something, but compared to the market, I think the NFL and the Buffalo Bills viewed O.J. Howard as more of a backup tight end than a guy who could challenge Dawson Knox. So overall, we've gotten to the end of the Bills here. I think my overall takeaways are that it's Diggs, Dawson Knox, and Gabriel Davis in the passing game. And running backs a little bit in flux. You could potentially take a little bit of a free bid on Zach Moss going into 2023. But again, I tried in my Dynasty league while I was doing the research for this to buy Dawson Knox. I'm pretty hot and bothered. I'm putting some chips on him as a breakout candidate this year. Even though, those 8th round tight ends in redraft often are a little bit of waste of capital, but I think he has a lot of potential opportunity and an elite quarterback. And when you're looking at a tight end breakout, those are two things I think I'm looking at. Quarterback, obviously talent, but mostly quarterback and opportunity. That wraps up the Buffalo Bills here, and we're going to move on to the New York Jets. And again, for anyone in my Dynasty League, they know I'm hot and bothered about the New York Jets because I own so many of these players in the Dynasty format. But my own self-interest aside, I think it's an interesting team because they have a lot of young talent. Zach Wilson, second pick last year. Elijah Moore was an early pick in the second round. Breece Hall was an early pick in the second round this year. And then Garrett Wilson was the 10th overall pick. So it's hard to find a team with more young talent from the last two drafts than the New York Jets. And you combine that with one of the observations I had towards the end of the season was this Mike LaFleur offense is really intriguing. He's the offensive coordinator for the Jets, brother of Matt LaFleur. And I'll tell you, I was really impressed with what they did on the offensive side of the ball. I wouldn't be surprised if he's a potential head coaching candidate in the next few seasons too. But I liked what they were doing. I liked how they were scheming things up. You saw, some other quarterbacks be effective too. And even, Zach Wilson showed some improvement towards the end of the year. So really like what the New York Jets have done here on the offensive side of the ball in terms of scheme and adding talent. Quarterback position, it's pretty obvious it's Zach Wilson. But this is the same thing as Mac Jones that we touched about on episode 1, where Zach Wilson's in the second year of his rookie deal. He was a first-round pick, so there's a fifth-year option. And, okay, that to me means there's a decision to be made after 2023. So I think you're looking at 2 more seasons to prove himself. And I would ignore the noise in the market where everyone's like, if it's not this year for Zach Wilson, it never will be. Like, look, he was the second overall pick. Sam Darnold got 3 seasons. These first-round picks, they usually get 3 seasons to prove themselves. Even look at Daniel Jones, who's having his 4th season with the Giants to prove himself. So I think that's all noise in the market where people are saying they've brought in a lot of talent. If Zach Wilson doesn't perform, we know it's him. You probably do. Yeah, I agree. But he's also still young. And I think we rush these quarterbacks through their development so fast. We want to rule them out after their rookie year a lot of times. And I think that's irresponsible. I think a lot of these guys, Zach Wilson particularly, came into the league as a project. And it's going to take him a few seasons. So he's got a chance this year in year 2, but if he fails, I still think you have another season for him. So if you're in a super flex format with any of these, first year rookie quarterbacks we're going to go through, or I should say 2021 rookie quarterbacks entering their second year, through 2023, I think you have a starting quarterback because they're all going to have about 3 years to prove themselves. The backups, it's interesting. I'm not sure who would play if Zach Wilson was out because both Flacco and Mike White played pretty well last year. Flacco's on a 1-year, $3.5 million deal. Mike White's on the restricted free agent deal. Difference being no guarantees, but he's on $2.5 million. Mike White's an undrafted, an unrestricted free agent in 2023. So that's somewhat interesting based on his performance against the Bengals last season. So I think it's possible some teams would have a little interest in him as a bridge quarterback. But that said, I mean, the restricted free agent tender was $2.5 million with no guaranteed money. And for no team, 31 other teams, no one sent in a tender offer for Mike White. I think that really shows you what the league thinks of him. They don't really see him as a starter, maybe as more as a backup. So I'm not really taking a chance on any of these guys to back up Zach Wilson. You can pretty much ignore in a dynasty format. The main takeaway is just Zach Wilson, I would say 2 more seasons left to prove himself. One final note on Mike White. He had that big game against the Bengals, and one of my league mates picked up Mike White and was, kind of trying to hold him over my head, and we made a bet right after, and I forget like exactly what the terms of the bet were, but I was like, Mike White's not going to be the starter along the season, and I won myself a meal at the 99, very New England of me, so still need to cash in on that deal for the 99 dinner, but hopefully we'll do that shortly. But again, I would rebet. It's tough to see Mike White really becoming something in the league outside of a long-term backup. That brings us to the running back position. And, this one right here is probably more settled than some of the other running back rooms that we've gone through because they've drafted these guys in consecutive years. Breece Hall is on his rookie contract. He was the 4th pick of the 2nd round. And Michael Carter's in the 2nd year of his 4-year rookie deal. He was a 4th round pick, and he was pretty effective in his time last season. So I like both players. I think, I sort of see it as Breece Hall as the primary back getting, 65 to 70% of the work. And then Michael Carter coming in as the change of pace, pass down back. So I like both players. I think they're going to be it's going to be these 2 guys going forward for the next couple seasons. After them, it's Tevin Coleman. He's likely to make the team, but he's really not going to have much value in a dynasty format. And then Ty Johnson and LaMichael Perrine are okay to ignore, just based on the fact that the Jets have drafted 2 straight running backs. I think that tells you what they think of LaMichael Perrine since they picked him. So the backfield, to me, it's Hall and Carter for the foreseeable future. There's no real major takeaways other than I wouldn't ignore Michael Carter in a dynasty. If the Michael Carter owner is, ready to jump ship after they added Breece Hall, I'd go in and I'd buy cheap because he's going to have a role. He's the clear backup. And I don't think Breece Hall gets all the work. So I still think Michael Carter will be a flexible emergency option when Breece Hall is healthy, with the upside for more when Breece Hall misses time. So I think Michael Carter is still a good dynasty, backup running back to hold. Get to the receiver position here, and a lot of overall themes. Again, Zach Wilson was picked in 2021. Michael Carter, a 2021 4th rounder. Breece Hall was a 2nd rounder this year. And now you have Elijah Moore, a 2022 2nd round or 2021 2nd rounder. Garrett Wilson picked with the 10th pick this year. So a lot of young talent. And even, he's probably off the roster. We'll get to him. Denzel Mims, he was a 2020, was it a 2nd round pick? So they've really spent capital on the offensive side of the ball, and it's a really interesting young team from that perspective. But I look at the receiver position, and I think the top 4 is pretty set in stone. Garrett Wilson, Elijah Moore, Corey Davis, and Braxton Berrios. Garrett Wilson was really their answer to, they were in the market for a lot. They were looking for a number 1 receiver all offseason. They were in on Amari Cooper. They were in on Deebo Samuel, and they were in on Tyreek Hill. So instead, they didn't pull off any of those deals, and they drafted Garrett Wilson with the 10th pick in the 1st round. And I think I'm going to keep pounding this because I'm a true believer, even more so than contracts, money and draft capital. So just capital in general tells you a lot about the team. And in redraft formats right now, people are fading Garrett Wilson hard. I think he's available in the 9th or 10th round. And this guy was picked at the 10th overall pick. And those names I said that they were pursuing in the offseason, he was their answer when they couldn't get them. So he has a role in the offense. I don't care what anyone says. Garrett Wilson's going to have a role in the offense based on that. So I expect Garrett Wilson to have a good target share, and I expect Elijah Moore to have a good target share. He's in his 2nd year of his rookie deal. He has 3 years left. I wrote that really weird in the show doc. But he's only 22 years old, and Matt Harmon, again of Reception Perception, has just called Elijah Moore a total stud and says he's a really good route runner. If you look at his success rates and Reception Perception, it's impressive. So Elijah Moore, I think he's awesome. And if you can get him a little bit cheaper after they brought in Garrett Wilson, all the better in a dynasty. I think those two are going to be a good receiver combo while they're with New York. And yes, a lot of it hinges on Zach Wilson. But, I mean, even with it, I think good receivers can overcome, some quarterback play to some extent. So I think these guys could both potentially be studs. I like them a lot. They're going to be here for a while. Corey Davis, really they're going to have a 3-receiver set. They run 11 personnel a lot. And Corey Davis is still only 27 years old. And you look back at a lot of these receiver contracts from the 2020 offseason, they look a lot nicer ever since that Christian Kirk deal came out. But he has 2 years, $23 million left, which for a starting outside receiver is reasonable money. $14 million cap hit, so he's going to be on the team this year. Dead cap hit, I should say. And then in 2022, that's this year. I'm reading wrong here. So $13.6 million cap hit in 2022, and only an $11.6 million cap hit in 2023. So honestly, that's a pretty solid deal. And I think, for a lot of people, and myself included, going into this, I was like, all right, it's Garrett Wilson, it's Elijah Moore. There's no guaranteed money in 2023, or his salary's not guaranteed for Corey Davis. So the only dead cap going into next year is $670,000. So I was like, they're going to get rid of Corey Davis going into next year. But as I started to dig into this more, I'm like, I mean, sure, none of it's guaranteed, but $11 million for a starting outside receiver on this team, I'd probably hold him. I could see the Jets holding on. That's a decent deal. So I think Corey Davis is a solid number 2-3 option in the passing game. He showed rapport with Wilson. And I could see the Jets holding on to him for next year. And if they don't, all the better for a dynasty owner. Maybe he gets some more opportunities somewhere else. So if you can flip like a 3rd-round pick or something in the dynasty format for Corey Davis, I would do it right now, because a lot of people are leaving him for dead in dynasty. And I think these are the guys who are going to have fantasy value this year: Wilson, Moore, and Davis. We'll get to the tight ends. I don't really think they're going to take too much of a target share. And then, a guy like Braxton Berrios, we'll go through him, but I don't think he's really going to have a whole lot of a target share either. So I think these top 3 receivers can all be pretty solid and have a decent amount. Granted, again, we'll have to see how the target shares work out, but I think, based on their cost right now in a dynasty format, Corey Davis is the guy you can buy cheap, and he might still have a pretty decent target share in the offense. So Braxton Berrios, they re-signed him this offseason. He was pretty good at the end of last year. I actually added him because I was watching some Jets games for my Zach Wilson ownership, and Berrios popped off the screen. He was pretty good in the slot. But it's 2-year, $12 million contract, $7 million guaranteed, and I'll tell you, it's effectively a 1-year contract to me, because the way the Jets have done this on their deals this offseason, and we'll talk about it at the tight end position too, they really backloaded the deal in terms of base salary, but not a whole lot of it remained to be guaranteed. So I think a lot of the guarantees were up front, and, he has a $3.7 million cap hit in 2022, Berrios. That jumps to $8.2 million in 2023. And for a slot receiver kick returner, that's expensive. And so I look at Berrios and I'm like, he's gone after this year. There's no way. He would have to really outperform his contract to earn $8.2 million. It's only $3.2 million guaranteed at that time, dead cap. So that's $5 million the Jets can save on the cap next year if they move on from Berrios. I'd rather do that. I mean, you can save more from Corey Davis, sure, but I'd rather roll with Wilson, Moore, and Davis, save $5 million on Berrios, and move forward. So that's what I'm thinking the Jets do. And from a dynasty perspective, I think that's sort of what you think this team does going forward. You look at the rest of the receivers. Jeff Smith, decent chance to make the roster. He's on a restricted free agent deal. He has an advantage over Denzel Mims for that last receiver spot because he has special teams value. And you're going to keep hearing this for the last receiver spot, but I really think that's what it's going to be. And then Denzel Mims, N'Keal Harry. Sorry, that slipped. Basically, it's the same situation as the Patriots. You saw N'Keal Harry get traded. I think the Jets would love to get whatever they can from Mims. I think they'll be showcasing him. He has 2 years left on his rookie deal. He's 25 years old. This coaching staff clearly doesn't mesh with him, so he's not going to be on the team this year, whether it's a cut or a trade. I think they're moving on from Denzel Mims. Finally, we get to the tight end position, and I just kind of wanted to talk again a little bit about contract structure. They brought in Tyler Conklin and CJ Uzomah. Both of them very similar to Braxton Berrios, where the cap hit is more over the second half of the deal, and they really saved money on the early part of the deal. So you look, Conklin is, I'm going to go 2023, sorry, I'm going to go this year, then 2023, 2024 with these guys. Conklin is 3.3 mil, then 8.4 mil, 8.4 mil. Uzomah, 4.6 mil, 9.6 mil, 9.6 mil in the following 2 years. So I think what these contract structures are telling you, if you take Conklin, Uzomah, and Berrios, all very similar, I think it's telling you that the NFL and the Jets in this instance are making a bet that the salary cap's going up a lot going into 2023. Because they're backloading these and they're really trying to get the cap hits in future seasons. So I've mentioned this a little bit on the Patriots podcast with the cap hit, or the NFL cap going up, and the Patriots didn't have a lot of money going, committed to 2023. I think it could be a good spending year for them. And I think a lot of these other teams took the notion of, let's borrow from the 2023 cap because we expect it to be so big. So, actionable item, I'm not sure there is one, but just an observation here, just with some of these teams, I think they're expecting the salary cap to really jump. So that could help explain some of these receiver contracts too. And then again, if the salary cap jumps, I keep going back to this, Corey Davis, it's going to be a value at $11 million next year. So I really think he's on the team, and Braxton Berrios is the one who's out next year. And I'm going to be very interested to see if I can come back to this podcast next year and see if that ended up being the case. So Conklin, Uzomah, they're both going to be around for at least 2 seasons. You look at these deals, 2023. So, sorry, I'm going to go back to the basics here. Conklin was a 3-year, $20 million deal with $10 million guaranteed. Uzomah was a 3-year, $24 million deal with $15 million guaranteed. So more guarantees on Uzomah. But I've heard Conklin might be the better pass catcher. So it could just be Uzomah's experience and blocking. So from a fantasy perspective, I'm still in on Conklin for the pass catching, even though the guarantees tell you it's CJ Uzomah. But then you look at the deals again. Both of them have high dead cap hits for next year. So they're going to be around this year and next year. 2024 for both of them, the dead cap is 1.6, actually identical for both of them. So Jets can move on in 2024. And it could be a plan because they drafted Jeremy Ruckert in the 3rd round this year, pick 37 at tight end, who, they can sit him around, develop him, and then they can move on from one of Tyler Conklin or CJ Uzomah going into 2024. Which could be an important year, too, because you're going to have Elijah Moore, you're going to have Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, if he looks good, could be up for contract extensions, Zach Wilson potentially. So, they essentially committed some money to these guys for 2 seasons, and then when they need that money for future contracts, I think they're going to be able to clear some dead cap space. So, overall, on the Jets offense, number one, I think we pointed out a pattern with their free agent signings. It's going to be interesting just the way teams, structure their deals. We saw the Patriots not really taking much from the future cap. Now we see the Jets who are really front loading their deals. So at least this season. So I think that was really interesting. And then you look at some of the overall takeaways in terms of a fantasy perspective. I think the guys in the offense, I think at the running back position, I'll call it a 70-30 split between Breece Hall and Michael Carter. In the future, it's going to be them. Zach Wilson, at least 2 more seasons, I would say, including this season. to prove himself as a starter for the Jets. And at the receiver position, I think it's the big three. And I don't think these tight ends, Conklin or Uzama, are really going to have... They paid them a decent amount of money to get some targets, yes, but I don't think they're really going to take away from the receivers. I don't know. Anytime you have these three receivers, like you look at the Steelers last year, when the players that they had, and it's hard to predict who's going to get what. I think, what was it? It was Juju, Chase Claypool, and Deontay Johnson, and it was they can't all produce for fantasy. Could be a similar thing, but in a dynasty format for a third round pick, I think it's worthwhile to go in and invest in Corey Davis. But that's it for the Jets and the Buffalo Bills. We'll have Miami on the next episode, and I think we're also we're going to be in the middle of training camp, so we'll do half the episode on Miami and maybe half the episode on just general training camp observations and news that have come out throughout the league. So that's what we'll have for you, hopefully next weekend on the podcast. But for this episode, appreciate you guys listening. Again, follow us on YouTube. We have the YouTube page for the video. And then you can search for that All Aboard podcast on YouTube. And we're on Apple Podcasts. We're on Amazon Prime Video, Amazon Music. And we're also on Spotify. So you can find us on any of there. Please smash the subscribe button. And if you want to follow on Twitter, you can find me at the Fantasy CPA. Again, for the All Aboard podcast, I'm Brandon DeFreitas. We'll see you guys next week. Thank you.